I think we all know where we are as an economy, but I'm just going to remind you in case we don't, but I'm not going to dwell on it. But I think it's important to identify the facts about our situation, because unless you identify the problem, it's very difficult to solve the problem. I then want to go on and just update a little bit on Limerick and the Midwest region from an economic perspective, but then more importantly I want to talk about the sort of road to recovery for the Irish economy, and within that Limerick and the Midwest, because at the end of the day it's going to be very difficult for any region in this country to make any significant progress unless the national picture starts to come back on track. Looking at the Irish economic reality and where we are as an economy, we know we're in a fairly deep recession at the moment. GDP is going to contract this year by 6.5%. There's nothing new there. Public finances in a mess. The labour market deteriorating very rapidly. The banking system is still in a pretty difficult place, and there's still a huge aura of uncertainty surrounding that, as was evidenced again in a Dáil committee yesterday with further amazing revelations. Confidence in our leadership is still pretty fragile, and Anthony alluded to the whole question of leadership, and I would be fairly passionate about that. If you look at Ireland back in 1987, we were in a serious position. In 1986, whether we realise it or not, the International Monetary Fund was taking a very unhealthy interest in Ireland and the Irish economy, and that prompted a turnaround in March '87. Ray McSharry, Charlie Haughey, Alan Dukes stood up. They provided very strong political leadership. They made hard decisions, and whether we agreed or disagreed with those decisions, and some people would argue that in the health sector, for example, we're still paying the price of some of the cutbacks at that stage. But whether we agreed or disagreed, we got strong leadership and we bought into that. The sense, it was fairly palpable, this sense almost immediately after March 1987, that people started to believe again that we were capable of getting ourselves out of the mess that we undoubtedly were in at the time. And people react to leadership. People are driven by leadership and dragged along by leadership. We certainly got that. And even if you look more recently, 2001, 2002, when the economy started to go into a little bit of a downward spiral, we had the dot-com bubble bursting in the States, US recession, we had foot and mouth here. So things start to slow a little bit. At that stage, Charlie McCreevy stood up. He made some very hard decisions, and politically they were hard because in the recent election they had made a whole load of commitments and promises on spending that he said we will not be able to deliver. He implemented the spending cutbacks, provided strong leadership. We bought into it very quickly, and we got the economy back on track fairly quickly. This time round, it's in my view been a little bit different. Over the last couple of years we have not, in my view, got strong political leadership. We've been lurching really from one crisis to the next, and the latest instalment is about to be presented on April 7th, and I hope to God, for all our sakes, that April 7th brings a little bit of finality to the uncertainty, that we know exactly what the tax implications of the budget are, that we know exactly what the spending implications are, that as businesses and as individuals we can then start to plan with a little bit of certainty and go forward again. I'm not holding my breath on that, but I certainly think it is time we started to get strong political leadership, because if we get it, we will react to it and it will start to reignite confidence in the economy again. I think there's no doubt whatsoever about that. So that's where we are as an economy, in a fairly difficult place. As I say, there's a lot of slides. I'm going to skip through them very quickly. I presume if anybody wants access to the slides, they will be available. I certainly have no problem. So if you contact Alan, I'm sure he'll be able to distribute them. Give you a job here this morning, Alan. But so there's a lot of detail in there, as I say. But this is the unemployment situation. You can see there, there's been a fairly significant deterioration over a relatively short period of time. Here we see where the changes are occurring in the labour market. And one of the things that seriously disturbs me, and Alan made the point about his conviction that everybody is prepared to get behind the wheel. I have some reservations in that regard. You know, I think the notion that the people of Ireland, or at least the trade unions, are trying to take some of the people of Ireland onto the streets next week in a one-day strike is absolutely bizarre. And I ask the question, what planet are we living on? You know, there is a view out there that has been expressed a lot in recent times that why should the public sector bear the brunt of the adjustment in the Irish economy? They didn't create the problems, so why should they be the victims? That is incorrect. They are not the victims. Everybody across the economy is a victim to some extent. If you see there, in terms of where the jobs have been lost during 2008, there were actually 10,400 jobs created in the public sector. The private sector shed just under 100,000 jobs. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the brunt of the economic adjustment is falling on the private sector. It is falling on private sector jobs. And I think we need to recognise that and realise that. And then I think we all need to get behind the wheel and start pushing the economy forward. Looking at the economic environment in 2009, you know, it's a difficult year, there's no doubt about that. I suppose to me the key point is that there are prospects for recovery. Okay, the prospects for recovery are contingent on factors, some of which are outside of our control, such as the international economic cycle. But there are other factors that are very definitely within our control. You know, we need to sort the banking situation. We need, most of all, to become more competitive as an economy. You know, over the last 6 or 7 years, we allowed the cost of doing business in this country get out of control. And as a small, open economy, that is absolutely crucial. A view appeared to grow in this country in recent years that exports were no longer important, that we could sustain ourselves domestically by building houses for each other, by buying houses from each other, and by buying goods and services from each other. That is utter rubbish in my view. We're a small, open economy, 4.2 million people. Exports and the external environment are absolutely essential. So we need, as an economy, to get real and to become more competitive. And I'll be telling you specifically how I believe we need to do that shortly. This is my forecast. You can see there, you know, significant contraction growth this year, and I think we're going to see a modest contraction next year, obviously dependent on what happens to the international environment. Moving on, before I talk about the solutions, to Limerick and the Midwest. I sense, and I know Limerick well because my wife is from Limerick, I spend a lot of time down here. I always get the sense here that, and maybe you get it in every regional centre in the country, I'm not certain, but I always get a sense here that there's a feeling we're doing much worse than other parts of the country. And the reality is that is not the case. You know, the southeast, for example, where I come from, is pretty much an economic Armageddon at the moment. You know, Waterford City is being decimated. So we need to get real about where we are. There are a lot of positive indicators in Limerick and the Midwest in general. For example, disposable incomes per head of population in Limerick are 0.3% above the national average. Okay, still well behind Dublin, but 1% ahead of Cork. And in my view, in my life, I tend to gauge everything against Cork, because any time you can say we're doing better than Cork is a good one for me. And this goes back to hurling, but you know, Limerick is doing okay in terms of disposable incomes per head of population. Looking at the breakdown by region, okay, the Midwest is 3% behind the national average and is just 0.6% ahead of the Southwest, and it's the third highest region in the country. So it's doing okay in a relative sense.